If you're new to this podcast, my name is RuthAnn. My husband Lance was a service-connected, disabled U.S. Navy veteran. He was sick for 25 of the 27 years we were together, and the last 12 years of his life, I was his full-time caregiver. This podcast is about caregiving in all its forms. Today, I'm honored to welcome Kevin and Allison to this podcast. They're not only my dear friends, but they are also advocates for caregivers and people with disabilities. As parents of a remarkable teen who has multiple disabilities, they have navigated countless challenges and triumphs within the disability and advocacy community. Their lived experience brings invaluable insight to conversations about love, resilience, and the importance of recognizing the dignity of every life. I'm so grateful they're here to share their story with us. Welcome, Kevin and Allison.
Thanks for having us, RuthAnn.
Thank you.
Could you both introduce yourselves, share what you do professionally, and tell us a little bit about your family?
I'm Allison. I currently stay home. I like to call myself a retired accountant. I did that once upon a time, but we had kiddos, and then my dad lived with us for a while, and so I've been staying home with them.
I'm Kevin. I'm a college professor. Have been for about 22 years now. We have 3 children. Our oldest is Jameson. He's 17. We have as of last week, 15-year-old daughter, and Emmeline, and we have a second daughter who is 12 named Maggie.
Well, in this episode, I just want to get to know your family a little bit and hear a little bit about what brought you into advocacy. Can you share a bit about your son, Jameson, who he is, what makes him unique, and about his diagnosis or diagnoses?
Gladly.
Go ahead. Start.
When Jameson was about 6 months old, we had some blood tests done. And the results came back that he has a translocation on chromosomes 5 and 6. So a little bit of chromosome 5 and a little bit of chromosome 6 decided to play Red Rover and be in the other spot. We had to do a different genetic test to find out if the translocation was balanced, like if all the material was there just in different spots, or if it was unbalanced, if something got duplicated or left out. And when we got that test back, we discovered that his translocation was balanced, but he was also has a microdeletion on one copy of chromosome 2. So the geneticist diagnosed him with, and this is a super non-fancy name, he has 2p15-16.1 microdeletion syndrome, which just says what part of the chromosome he is missing. When the geneticist diagnosed him with that, and again, this was about 17 years ago, there was no case in the medical literature that he could find with a similar diagnosis. Since then, as testing has become more common and cheaper, there are now approximately 100 diagnosed cases of his primary genetic uniqueness in the medical literature, and we've also connected with a number of the families via a Facebook support group.
Mm-hmm. He was later, I'm trying to think when he was diagnosed with autism, which it seems that it probably correlates with his microdeletion syndrome. So how old was he when
he was about 5 when we got his autism diagnosis.
And for a lot of things, even though we think his disabilities are probably more strongly related to his microdeletion syndrome, when you're filling out paperwork, if you put autism, people, it's a known quantity, so they know what it is. So we often put that as the primary diagnosis, even though I believe that the deletion is probably what is causing most of his disabilities.
So what were some of the early signs that Jameson's development was different? You said that he was about 6 months old when you got this first diagnosis.
Actually, for a lot of the early months, he was doing things on a regular basis. Like he was rolling over, you know, when he was supposed to, a lot of those things. But he did, so when he was born, he had what's called a nevus sebaceous. So it's just some colorless moles on his chest. Not a big deal. And then he also had what was called a shawl scrotum, which just basically his penis and his scrotum were kind of attached. And again, not a big deal, but Kevin had gone out of town for a conference or something. And I did what all new mothers do. I started like Googling. I didn't know how to clean a shawl scrotum if there was something that I needed to do. And I remember Googling it, and that was a really bad idea, because it came up as a symptom of all of these, you know, different syndromes where the child dies in, you know, months of birth. And so I think I freaked out as a new mother. So when Kevin came home, we had made an appointment with our pediatrician right away. We went in and they're like, oh, it's probably nothing, but that's what started the process of getting the blood work done. And we lived in California at the time and had really good insurance that were like, oh yeah, we can do this test and do this test. It's costing you nothing. So it was great that we lived in California at the time. So that's what started it, even though he wasn't missing a lot of milestones. Post getting like the diagnosis, he wasn't crawling or sitting up. His head was a little like wobbly. So a lot of strength issues that he wasn't meeting. And I think then like he didn't crawl until his first birthday. He didn't walk until he was like 18 months. And a lot of these things are still within the time frame of a typical child, but like towards the end of it. And then everything else just kept getting a little bit further and further away from a typical child development.
When he was born, he had been sort of head down in the womb and didn't move a whole lot. So one side of his neck was a little bit shorter. He had wry neck or torticollis. And so he'd actually been in PT since, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks to try to stretch out that side.
Right.
And his genetic condition causes low muscle tone. So it's hard for him to build muscle. Motor coordination is hard. He had a hard time nursing. And so looking back, a lot of the things that we noticed, even when they were within the typical developmental time frame, we see now that, oh, that was probably right. So he's probably having a hard time nursing because the motor control was tricky
and just weak. Like he didn't have the strength to latch on and stuff as well. So
did you feel like when you were asking those questions of his providers that you were getting answers and that they were looking into things, or did you feel like you were continuing to be told that this was just normal?
Actually, I felt like early on, like when I had asked the question again, he was very young when I first asked. They're like, we don't think it's a big deal, but you know what, we understand as a parent, and we will go ahead and like do these tests. I think as he's gotten older and we've been in different places, it's gotten harder. But I feel like early on, and I guess maybe it was just California was a little bit different than everywhere else, but they like readily sent him to get blood work done. And then when he did get his diagnosis, we went and got blood work done to see if either one of us had a deletion also, or, you know, the same thing. So like they were, again, pretty early on, very attentive to our desires to get things done, I think.
We've lived in 3 different states. We've had a number of different family doctors. We've had to get different specialists. And on the whole, I feel like everybody has been pretty responsive. Our current pediatrician has been wonderful.
Yeah.
She understands that we probably know more about the condition than she does. We've given her some of the medical literature that we've collected. And she is, I think, exceptionally attentive to what we ask, not only about Jameson, but about our girls too.
Yeah. And then early on, who was it that gave us the binder worth of information?
I had an administrator at my second teaching position that when Jameson, after Jameson was born, when we were in Idaho, who had taught at a medical school. So at one point, he just looked up and he found all the literature that had been published to date that he could find, gave me PDFs. And so we have a collection of all of that stuff. And there's a wonderful nonprofit in the UK called Unique that runs a website called Rare Chromo. And they put out guides that sort of summarize the hundreds of different kinds of genetic conditions that have been found. And so every few years they update the one for Jameson's particular condition with what the current literature says.
And what's the name of that website again?
It's the website is called Rare Chromo, as in chromosome, and the company, the nonprofit that does it is Unique. I'll make sure to get the link for you if you're.
Yep, that'd be great. And I'll post that in the comments. So through this process, then, how did you first learn about his diagnosis? And what was the process like for you as a family?
Again, I think we went through and when we got the diagnosis, I remember feeling, it was interesting because we got a diagnosis, but really no prognosis about what his life was going to be like. So again, because he was new, like, and they hadn't heard of this, or a lot of the people we had talked to hadn't heard of this. Again, they had no like direction, like, will he talk? Will he walk? Will he feed himself? Like, we didn't know a lot of these things. And as he's gotten older and there's been more people in the literature, we do find like find out different things. Like sometimes they have small kidneys and different things, but like his diagnosis is sort of like a spectrum when you think of autism. So there are children who are not walking, not talking, not feeding themselves, have feeding tubes, have vision issues, liver issues, like all that sort of thing, or kidney issues, not liver issues. And then there is the other side where they, talk. Jameson is verbal. He does feed himself, he walks and stuff like that. He just has a little bit harder time. So it became this spectrum. But at the time when we found out the diagnosis, it was really scary because nobody could tell us what steps were. Like, will he live to be 5? Will he live to be 30? Normal? Like, so there was a lot of unknowns. So while it was good to get that, it was also discouraging in a sense because we still knew nothing.
It's completely unhelpful in some ways to have the diagnosis without the prognosis.
Yeah.
And now as we've connected with other families that also have members that have this condition, there are 2 people with this condition that we know of in other countries that are both in their 30s. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to think that his genetic condition should cause lower lifespan. And so that's been kind of helpful to see that, okay, it's not like there's no evidence that at some point his liver's or his kidneys are going to shut down or his heart's going to stop working or something like that. And so just having some sense of what a little bit other families have gone through and are going through with somebody with the same condition has been helpful. But it probably wasn't until he was 8 or so before we really started connecting with some of those folks.
Yeah, probably.
Being that you went through the first 8 years of his life without any support from that community, do you feel like it was a little bit more challenging for you?
It was, although I feel like day-to-day life made it that we were almost too busy to think about it, I guess, because then we had 2 more children. So it was too busy to think about, and things were progressing, I guess. So he was developing, he was walking and stuff like that. So there was no signs that there was anything that was going to, like, he was not getting worse, I guess, in terms of his health. So he was still progressing.
Do you mind sharing some of the limitations that Jameson has so that our listeners can get a better understanding?
Yeah, so he's got really low muscle tone, so it's hard for him to do things. We have an adaptive bike that he can ride, but after about 15 minutes, just that, he's completely spent. Motor planning is tricky, so it took him a long time to learn how to walk. He's tied shoes maybe 3 or 4 times, so fine motor control is difficult, which made early feeding, pencil use hard. His penmanship is still large and pretty messy, even though he can write stuff. He has some balance issues, probably related to trunk support. It wasn't until we lived here in Michigan that he really ever kind of ran. And he still, when he does run, he runs on his toes.
We always call him a drunken sailor because he kind of looks like he just kind of goes whichever way. So
one year he went for Halloween as Johnny Depp from Pirates of the Caribbean, and it was perfect because he just walked like drunk Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
He's got cognitive impairments. He's got an autism diagnosis, we said. He's got an ADHD diagnosis, which makes focus at school trickier. He has something called alexithymia, where he has a hard time understanding what he's feeling and processing his own emotions. So he'll often get confused being hungry with being sad. So it's not the hangry that, you know, some people have.
Or he'll say he doesn't feel good, that his stomach feels bad, and we think that that's anxiety, or that he's anxious about something, because he won't have a fever, he doesn't, you know, vomit or anything, there are no other symptoms, but he'll say that he's sick or I don't feel good, and we think it's an anxiety thing. But like, he doesn't feel embarrassment that we know of. Maybe he does, and we just haven't figured out that what he's trying to tell us there. But there are lots of things it's hard for him to express his emotions. So
it makes it hard for him to, when he comes home from school, if we ask details about his day, he can't often tell us what went really well, what went bad. And so when he's not with either of us, there's just a big cloud of uncertainty about what's really going on. And his teachers over the years, for the most part, have been willing to spend extra time expressing that. But it's very strange for us to not be able to ask him, you know, what was the best part of your day? We can ask him, what'd you have for lunch? And he'll tell us something, but we don't know if he's telling us what he really had or just sort of the first thing that came to mind.
Like, it takes him a while to process things. So sometimes he'll come home like having had a bad day. We'll ask him what was wrong. He won't be able to tell us. And then like a couple hours later, he'll tell us something that went wrong. Oh, I can't even think of anything right now. I didn't want to do X, Y, or Z. Oh, sorry, your dog is barking. He didn't want to do something, or something, you know, bad happened. He didn't like gym. There was something that happened that led to that. And we had this a few times when he was in choir. Like, he wouldn't sing the songs, you know, for the choir concert, but then 2 weeks later he would start singing, and we're like, where did this come from? And it was the choir songs. And so it's like, it took him a while to like process those things. I feel like the processing has gotten quicker as he has gotten older, or has learned to process differently. But he does have some processing things. And then along with the autism diagnosis, he is very focused on certain things. I feel like this is probably the autism, don't you? Mm-hmm. He loves letters. He loves them in all sorts, shapes, sizes. He will talk about them for days upon days. We do letter hunts. It is all things letters, or all things Mickey Mouse. So he draws Mickeys, and actually he's an excellent like drawer of Mickeys. He loves them. So he does a lot of that, a lot of Play-Doh, wiki sticks sort of thing. So he just gets very focused on a few different things.
Well, thanks so much for sharing a little bit about him. I'm sure that will be helpful to people. And I loved hearing all of those things. I haven't seen him since he was little. So did Jameson's diagnosis affect your decision to have more children?
Definitely.
So as Allison said, when we got his diagnosis, we also went in and they did some genetic testing on us to see if he had inherited the condition from either of us. And he didn't. We had an early meeting with a genetic counselor, whether or not this was likely to affect any more children that we had. We were told that there was no reason to think that either his translocation or his deletion were caused by us, but there was just a whole lot of uncertainty. And so it did take us a while to figure out if we wanted to have more children, just because what it meant was so uncertain.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I forgot about one thing that happened when he was about 6 months again. He had a rash on his face. And we we went in to see what it was, and they're like, oh, it's not impetigo, it's not this, it's not that. And they're like, it could be this other thing, but that usually happens within 2 weeks of birth. So we don't think it's that, but we'll do some blood tests. Blood test came back and he had neonatal lupus, and it was coming out on his face in the form of this rash. I mean, it was really bad.
He looked like he had pink leopard spots over his entire face and head.
And it all went away, and they said that it was not a problem, like, and it meant that I had lupus, which I don't really, but I had enough markers to give him lupus or neonatal lupus. So he'll be fine, but he has a higher probability of developing that later. But in the genetic testing, they also were looking at that to see if our future children could have lupus as well. So I think that was one of the reasons we went to the genetic counselor as well.
It was actually when we went in for the blood test for them to confirm that it was neonatal lupus, that they're like, is there anything else? And that's where we had raised the issue of, we found these other things that are markers for, or correlates for other genetic conditions. And so that's actually how we got the first genetic test that found the deletion, which led to the second that led to the discovered the translocation that led to the second, where we discovered the deletion. And both of our daughters have had some degree of neonatal lupus. Wait, Emmeline did, Magdalene didn't. Correct. So
yeah, Emmeline within 2 weeks of birth had something. I thought it looked like the hook'em horns from the Texas Longhorns. It looked like just across her forehead, and it was gone within 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, hers was a lot less significant and went away a lot quicker.
Yeah, didn't have anything. And one of the things that they were cautious of is that sometimes with neonatal lupus, they can have something called heart block. So I don't know exactly what heart block is.
It's a calcium deposit in the sinus node that causes the heartbeat. And so if you know that there's a chance of heart block, they can have basically stuff there as soon as the kid's born in case their heart isn't beating regularly. They would give them a pacemaker. Yeah. And so I had to, after 22 weeks, I had to have weekly appointments with the OBGYN to make sure there was that the heartbeat was standard, typical, whatever. So with both girls, and it was fine. But Jameson could have had all of these things and we didn't know about it. So
I'm so glad that you guys are sharing all of this, because people just don't understand what it's like. I didn't know all the things that you had been through. So thank you for doing this.
Of just not knowing what any of it meant, what it would mean long-term. I mean, there's still a lot of that when it comes to him. There's a lot of that when it comes to parenting in general, but especially early on, not knowing much of anything about what this could mean. Just the anxiety, the fear was pretty debilitating early on.
Can you tell us what it's been like raising your two daughters alongside Jameson?
It has been, I think it's challenging. And I know we'll deal with this a little bit later, but it is early on, I think it was fine, or it wasn't bad. As he gets older and they get older and they are able to do so much and they are very active and everything, it is hard to manage trying to do things with the girls that they would love and have fun doing, and the limitations of what Jameson could do. So he can walk and do all these different things, but his energy level is a lot less, his attention, level, and he gets frustrated a lot quicker. So where I would love to go and do these things with the girls, I have to think about Jameson can't do them. This is going to be frustrating to him. He won't like it and will act out. And when he does kind of have a fit or throw a fit in public, I don't know that it embarrasses the girls. Maybe it does, but they get very, I think especially Emmeline, she always kind of folds in on herself. And so I think it is hard for them to navigate how they feel too with stuff. And then there's just a lot of guilt that, oh, I'm like the girls are missing out on this thing because we can't with Jameson.
So for example, this past spring, one daughter was playing lacrosse and in the school musical. Other daughter was doing swim and running track. And so we had something or other, at least one thing, like every night of the week. And so sitting at a 2-hour lacrosse match is not Jameson's favorite thing to do. Sitting at a 4-hour track meet, not his favorite thing to do. We can't really leave him home by himself. We have no other family in town. And so we're always trying to figure out what is the right way to not put him in situations that is not going to be good for him, while also minimizing the impact on the other kids. So we do a lot of what we call dividing and conquering, which just means that, you know, one of us gets to be at some things, the other can be at some things. For the play, we made sure to go to one production of it as a whole family, but we couldn't go to all of them. In other ways, the girls have really benefited from this. So they are both just very, very aware of the way that our culture excludes folks. They're very sensitive to issues about exclusion and injustice. Allison mentioned earlier, her dad lived with us for 7 years. He was in his mid 80s to late 90s during that time. They saw us caregiving, early 90s, caregiving for him. And so like all of that has been wonderful. They see what it's like for people to come alongside and are aware of the struggles and the importance of a number of things.
How do you talk about Jameson's disability with your daughters, and what values do you hope they take away from growing up in your family?
Go ahead. I mean, I feel like we've always just talked about it. So I don't remember ever being a moment where we, you know, had this, you know, moment where we told them, oh, he's this. I just feel like they've always known. I hope that it makes them more empathetic. And again, kind of like what he was saying, just more open to, you know, accepting everyone, no matter what. And I do feel like they are like that, and they do. And I hope that they learn from this to advocate for him, for themselves, you know, that, you know, and for others by seeing us do it for him. So I hope that that's what they take from it.
Since he's the oldest, they've always just known him as he is. And so they just have always known his conditions. They've always, we've had, you know, therapy appointments with him for their entire lives. I remember at one point when we were in Idaho, we used to have a therapist come into our house that would work with him for a while. She was often there over dinner. So we would just let her eat dinner with us, and she would sit near him and all that kind of stuff. And I remember when she left one day, Emmeline just got really sad. She's like, when am I going to have my own person like this? Right. So she just thought it was part of like every kid's growing up, which was like super wonderful. Right. Yeah. So I don't think that they've ever felt the stigma attached, but as they've gotten older, they have certainly noticed the stigma that other people put on disability. And so they're aware that we have to navigate a world that does not often make it hospitable for disabled folks, doesn't give them the resources or the space to be who they are, and have, you know, recognize that we are trying to carve out a space for him in a world that's really not built for him. But they see that as sort of a social problem and not like a Jameson problem.
And we might like touch on this later, or at least the details, but when Jameson was in high school at a certain school, I don't know if we want to say it, doesn't matter. They ended up kicking him out of school. And again, we can touch on that later, but our oldest daughter was going to start that school this past year. and she said that she couldn't go to a school that wouldn't accept her brother. So she then went to the public school that he is now going to because of that. So she saw the injustice and was like, I don't want to be a part of that. And so decided to go to a different school because of it.
Allison, you mentioned that you're not working since you've been raising your children, but Kevin, how do you balance your professional life with your role as caregiver and parent to Jameson and your daughters?
And I feel like I do it badly. One of the best things about being an academic, right? I have my summers off from teaching almost every year. I have an endowed chair, so I have a reduced teaching load compared to some of my colleagues to do more scholarship. And so my job is about as flexible as it's possible to be rather than being self-employed. And so I try to be as involved as I can. I often leave work in the middle of the afternoon rather than to stay to 4:30 or 5:30. Jameson technically could ride the bus home from his present school, but it would the way that the special education bus is run, he would be on the bus for about 55 minutes, and it's a 7-minute ride from our house to the school. And so I just don't schedule late afternoon meetings. I go pick him up, bring him home, take him to some, various therapies. If Allison is working with him and another kid needs picked up from lacrosse practice or whatever, I go do that. So there's a ton of flexibility on a regular day-to-day level, but it also just means I don't spend certain chunks of the regular workday doing regular work. And so there's a lot that I do in the evenings once the kids are back home after dinner. As I've gotten older, it's harder to do work after they go to bed and they go to bed later. I do some on the weekends to make up for it. I also travel, not a ton, but sometimes for work. And I feel like I'm pulled, right? So if I'm away at a conference, the entire time I'm there thinking this is important for my job. I'm also I should be home to make things easier to be there. So there's just a lot of feeling like there's not enough of me to go around. I've written journal articles in the parking lot of my kids' schools, or sometimes I try to make efficiency hacks. So one of our kids runs cross country. It's about a 15-minute drive from our house to where she has practice. Practice is 75 minutes. So if I drive her and leave her there and then come back home, I've got 25 minutes and I got to turn around and go back and pick her up. So I'll often just take work and write or grade in the van. Or if I haven't exercised or whatever, I've actually now run as a upper 40-year-old middle school cross country the last couple of seasons because I'm there. I might as well just get my exercise in. So I run with the team sometimes. So there's as much doing things with folks as I can, and then trying to fit in the other pieces around what needs to happen.
But also professionally, you have kind of changed the scope of your research and kind of the focus of your
It's true.
What you are.
Yeah. So I teach philosophy, and for a long time, most of my research was on metaphysics or philosophy of religion and ethics, and I still do some of that. But when I had my first sabbatical, this was when Jameson was in first grade, and we had just realized how bad his school was treating him. And so I decided to then start thinking about disability professionally too. And so for the last 10 years, 11 years, the majority of my research has been disability related in some way or other. I've written a couple of papers on public education, how that what special education looked like during the pandemic, the way that the kinds of social systems that are supposed to help families of vulnerable or disabled populations often become part of the problem. And
you wrote a book that I read.
I wrote a book on disability and inclusive communities, about the ways that historically our communities haven't been good and what that they My most recent book is on embodiment and how we need to take a lot broader view of what human bodies are supposed to be like and what we can learn about the importance of dependence and caregiving from looking at not only disability, but issues in feminism and some other kinds of stuff. So yeah, it has greatly shifted the scope of a lot of what my scholarly writing and teaching has been on.
And I can put the names and links to those books in the comments. Was there a specific moment or experience that caused you both to become disability advocates?
Yes, I actually know the moment. I have a friend in Idaho, Tammy. I won't give her last name, but she had a child with Down syndrome. And she was going to go listen to this speaker. And we had become friends. And so I went along with her, and it wasn't just about Down syndrome, but I think it was through the Down Syndrome Society, maybe.
It was the Treasure Valley Down Syndrome Society meeting, but they had a speaker about what navigating public education was like with a disabled child.
And so I found out all these things, and I love to say this because I feel like Kevin and I are both educated, and I feel but we didn't know what we didn't know. So we didn't know all of these things that we could have been advocating for. And I don't know if he was in kindergarten or first grade.
He was in kindergarten because Tammy's son was in first grade.
Right. And so we went to this conference, and this woman was an advocate, I think, for schooling, but had talked about all these different things, all these things that public schools have to do for kids with disabilities. And I had no idea. And so I came home, and I had this binder worth of stuff, and I'm like, Kevin, we have to do this. And so I think we didn't realize that we had more power in what he was able to do than we realized, because I think, and this was my experience growing up as well, that kids that had disabilities were in the special ed classroom. They were only allowed there. They were so very separated from the general population, so to speak, and that is where they belonged, right? And I think that's what I just thought was going to happen. And I didn't realize there was so much more that we could advocate for him. So I think, Kevin being the academic and knowing how to research things, found out so much stuff. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And then we just started fighting for what we knew he was legally allowed to have.
Allison and Tammy came home from that meeting, and I remember you guys came straight to our house. You must have ridden together.
Yeah.
Tammy must have driven you. And they came in the house. I think the kids were in bed. And they were just both crying. We didn't know what they should have been doing. We could see the house across the street from our subdivision.
School.
The school across the street from our subdivision. And Jameson was being bused along with Tammy's son about 7 miles away, so that they were taking almost all the disabled students in the district and putting them in one place. And they learned that that's not supposed to happen. And so with Tammy's husband, Mark, who is also an academic, we downloaded the state special education manual, which is Idaho's version of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we just started reading. And then we really pushed the district hard for a couple of years. It took about a year, but we got him to be able to go to the school that was right across the street.
Well, in first grade, he went to the school. So in kindergarten, he went to a different school. But by first grade, we had pushed them hard enough that he was going to the school across the street. And we got to walk them, to the school. So, and my daughter had she started kindergarten then too? No, not yet.
If he was in first grade, she would have started kindergarten when he was in second grade.
Yeah.
So we just wanted them to go to the same school. And so that Treasure Valley Down Syndrome Society meeting was sort of what started it.
Mm-hmm.
And then initially it was, what can we do for Jameson and what can we do for Tammy and Mark's son? And then as we met other parents, and they're like, wait, how did this happen? So then we just started trying to help out other folks. Jameson was playing in a unified flag football league. So every team had about half of their team were disabled, half were not disabled. Sometimes you couldn't tell who was on which part, it was wonderful. But when Jameson was out playing there because of his motor difficulties, I was almost always out on the field with him. And at halftime or after the game, she'd be like, Kevin, you need to meet this other parent. And so eventually we're like, I need to have business cards that to like give. I didn't want to give them my work business card. So after this Friday night football game, we decided, since he is missing part of one copy of chromosome 2, we decided to name our advocacy company 22 Advocacy. The logo has a little black mark representing his deletion on it. We made a logo. We incorporated in Idaho. We did business cards. And I still probably go to 5 or 6 IEP meetings every year with other folks. As our kids have gotten older and busier, it's harder to do quite the same level of it. But all of that can be traced back to realizing that the public school that we entrusted him to was violating state and federal law.
Yeah, I mean, the IEPs was where it started. We went to ours, fought for it, and it was a fight. And then we went with Tammy for her son, and it was a fight. But then we got them both to the same school because Tammy lived just in the neighborhood next to us. And then we had another person, autistic, Jesse, that they also wanted to go to the school. So we went to all these IEP meetings, and I say we, and I mean Kevin, because he knew these things. Like, he ended up knowing the law better than obviously the school. But once the school got wind of Kevin, they would start bringing their own attorneys into the meetings because Kevin knew far more than any of them did. And so when he would say, you have to do this, they're like, oh, we do? No, we don't. So then they would bring their own attorneys in, and Kevin was basically fighting with attorneys, knowing more than even some of them did. So, but we got what we wanted. So.
I learned that Idaho is a one-party record state. And so I would just record all the IEP meetings without even telling the school district that I was doing it. So if they admitted to violating the law, which sometimes they did, I had it documented. There's a couple of schools that I here in Michigan that I do IEP work for. One that I've done at the same family the last 4 years, and they bring district counsel because they need to have somebody to sort of resist stuff. Yeah. So a good friend of mine made me some custom socks. Allison gave me the nickname Jackass for Justice. And so on the bottom of these socks, it says Jackass for Justice. And I mean, I really don't like being a jerk, but if schools are not going to do what they're supposed to do, we also do some advocacy around accessible parking and ADA compliance here. If you're not going to do what's the bare minimum, which is legal compliance, then I really don't have a whole lot of patience for stuff. We were visiting my parents once in Ohio, and there's a bike path on an old train track that I grew up rollerblading and biking on. And we realized that they had redone some stuff and that the parking lot wasn't ADA compliant. And so I found out who was in charge of the park district. I sent them the relevant part of the ADA code. I said, you need to have a plan for me within the next 6 weeks, or here's the number at the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Federal Department of Justice where ADA complaints get filed. I look forward to your response. Well, it turns out that the person that runs the park district was actually one of my dad's colleagues. Which made things a little bit awkward, right? But not a bad person, but just wasn't willing to do what needed to be done. And
probably didn't know what needed to be done, to be honest. He didn't know what he was doing.
And so I have just leveraged what I know to make people's lives uncomfortable so they do what we think they need to.
So it sounds like you really discovered advocacy by accident.
Yeah. I mean, because I don't even think I was originally going to go to this thing with Tammy, and I ended up going with her. And so then finding out all this stuff, and I'm like, and I don't even know how, like, I'm just assuming she probably gets newsletters and emails and stuff like that. So just going to her with that. And we just were like, wow, we had no idea that like their education could be different and that they could go to the school right across the street. I'm like, why are we busing our kid or driving him that far? Because I think we did bus him for a while.
Yeah, you got picked up right outside.
Yeah.
There's a quote that I came across a number of years ago that's actually up on my website. And the person who said it, or probably wrote it, his name is Clara Clow, I believe. And the quotation says, I guess I'm an advocate. I think it's just caring. And this just so much, right? Like, I didn't set out to be an advocate. I just set out to do what I thought our son deserved. And then to do what other folks deserve and to try to make space for folks in these communities.
What advice would you give to parents who are just beginning this journey?
Okay, that's hard. What you want to say is like, oh, do this research and, learn all that you can. But it's when you're a parent of a child with a disability, it's hard to find the time to do these things, right? Like it's hard to find time to like sleep. So it's so hard. And then we have the privilege, or I mean, we're still together, and I know a lot of relationships with that have children with disabilities. There's a very high divorce rate. So like I'm not going to say, hey, you got to stay together, but it's good to have a partner. So it's hard to find advice like that. I don't know. I
mean, part of it, depending on what the condition is, learn about the condition, right? That didn't do us any good at the beginning because nobody knew.
Right.
Part of, if possible, depending on the condition, try to learn from adults that have that condition, right? So part of our own experience was initially listening to the parents of autistic kids, but we've learned over the years to listen to autistic adults rather than sometimes parents of autistic kids. Those two parts of the disability community often don't get along super great. Parents, and I get how this happens, but a lot of parents end up doing things that are pretty harmful because they don't know any better, because they don't have the right resources or whatnot.
They think they know better.
Yeah. And so to the degree possible, find out. I listen to a lot of audiobooks or interviews of autistic scholars, right? And again, autism is just part of Jameson's complex identity. But lean into those folks that have the most direct awareness of what it is that your loved one is dealing with. And while we've learned a lot from caregivers over the years, we've also learned a whole lot from disabled adults.
Yeah. And then community, like I think a community of disabled parents, disabled kids, adults, finding that. Again, we found like the group on Facebook, which has been helpful in a lot of ways because you can ask questions, and they're from all over the world. So like I know that the one adult that is in his, I think he's in his 30s, is in Australia, right? And then they do have different experiences because they have different levels of help, I guess, from their communities as well. But so community, and then you just have to listen to your kid, love them. I don't think that's like advice because you're going to do that anyway. But advice is hard. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard because the advice that we've sometimes been given, while well-meaning and maybe good for whoever gave it, ends up not being good for us. And so much of this is different. Depending on what the condition is, or even in the same condition, right? The common phrase is if you've met one autistic adult, you've met one autistic adult, and people's autism manifests in such a wide range of stuff that what somebody else might need in their experience is not what you need in that same experience. And so details about this is what you need to do become hard to do on any level of specificity. So you end up just saying, generalities or what almost sound like platitudes,
Yeah.
because just, it's so different.
Yeah, because I don't know how to give advice on a person who, like, their child is never going to walk or talk, because I don't know the details there. And so much of our lived experience is just finding out as we go. And you just have to learn your own child. And so it's just very difficult because there's nobody's exactly the same. And I mean, I guess that's with typical parenting as well. I tell my kids on a regular basis, I'm like, I'm new at this. I realize I've been a parent now for 17 years, but this is my first time through it. I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, I'm not sure, maybe that's the best thing to tell my kids, but I really feel like I'm a novice all the time. Like, this is brand new to me. And I have 3 kids, so it shouldn't be brand new, but everything is so different with all of them that I have no idea what I'm doing. So.
Well, as far as being advocates, I think that you set a great example. And one thing that I could say, the example that you set is to just keep going. And it's not fun. It's not fun because you care about the people in your life. You care about your children, your son, especially, advocating for him. And it's hard having to advocate for someone because the very basic things that we can do, people are often not doing. So thank you for your willingness to share this and for being the advocates that you are and for setting an example for all of us.
Not sure we're good examples, but there's a sense in which we're doing the best we can. And we look back at it, we're like, oh man, we screwed that up. There are lots of things that I wish I would have learned way earlier in the journey. But I mean, being human's hard.
Yeah.
And being a parent is hard. And being a human parent of complicated kids is even harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a lot of look back and go, oh, I wish I would have done this differently, but I can't. And I don't know, it's tough.
Well, your story reminds us that every life matters and that the work of caregiving and advocacy is so important. So thank you for taking the time today to share everything that you did. And I will see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thanks, RuthAnn.